Welcome to Artist and Critic. I'm Don Gray. If you've been watching these programs over the last couple of years, I guess we've been on the air, we've talked to many guests and artists and critics, as well as museum curators and so forth. And recently, you're aware that I've been doing a series attempting to assess modern art, explain from my point of view. Admittedly, it's my point of view, and a lot of people would not agree with it. But after 23 or 24 years as a painter, you develop a point of view, you develop a certain understanding through your experience painting pictures and looking at pictures and thinking about pictures, that if you don't have ideas by that time, perhaps you shouldn't be painting. So the recent series has been devoted to my thoughts and assessment of contemporary painting and where it's going and its problems as well as its strong points. Today I'm going to take a little different tack. I'm going to show you some of my own work. And I feel a little bit unsure about it, not because I don't have confidence in the work, but because I'm so prolific as a painter and have so many different kinds of paintings and drawings and watercolors and casings and acrylics and pastels and so forth. And I've been working so long that maybe I better shut my mouth, because if time is running out and I'm so worried about giving some idea of the work that has been done by me and some of the attitudes that a realistic artist has. And I hope to try to not only give you the feeling of what I've been after, but what it's like to be a realistic artist in our time, some of the problems you encounter, and so forth. Okay, so why don't we go to the first picture. And after living in the city for about 6 years, I left in '68 to move to rural country just north of the city. And this particular acrylic is of a telephone pole and trees clustered around the bottom in front of a sunset sky. One can pan up and it's essentially a vertical picture with this small sequence seen at the bottom of the picture, and the sky becomes very important. Wherever the realistic artist is, he responds to nature. He responds to the things of nature. He responds to the clouds, to the beautiful light. It's not a cliche to paint a sunset. There's nothing unpaintable. A realistic painter or any other kind of artist can paint any kind of picture they want to. We don't have to be afraid of, little old ladies in tennis shoes paint sunsets and that kind of thing. You can paint anything you want. And there's a certain lonely grandeur about that pole and the clustering trees struggling around it that is very expressive against the sky. If we go to the next picture, we'll be seeing another landscape, also in acrylic, painted out in the country, and showing cornfield, a young cornfield actually being cultivated. In the far left, beneath that dark tree, there's a teeny tiny little tractor off in the distance across the field with smoke coming from it. That's the light part in front of the trees. And this is simply a response to nature, to the magnificence of it, desiring to be out in the open, to feel a part of the breadth and magnificence of it. Of course, trying to express it through the clouds as well as the field and the dark trees themselves. Okay, let's just go to the next one. This next picture is self-portrait and is one of the pictures used to open the show. And it shows an artist, it happens to be me, in a certain particular guise. Now, this is a pretty uptight presentation, the sense of the collar button, the tie there, and holding the palette. That's not any sense of restriction. But it's just one aspect of the artist. Artists will paint themselves in many different ways, expressing different aspects of their personality, and really I painted it not to have a shirt and tie, but simply because of the color of the tie, all curlicues of yellow and orange and red and blue against the red shirt. It's a bright red shirt, so that it becomes a very strong color statement. Also, we move to the next one, and we see a different aspect of the artist. The artist as rather more powerfully presented, more, how we say it, more unconventional in appearance, I suppose. You know, there are so many different fashionable ways of dressing and so forth. But the head with the headband and certainly no necktie. I think I have this on a sweatshirt or a T-shirt. Painted with a skull that happens to be the oldest human skull. I worked at it from a picture and also a picture of the native. Rarely will I do that, but in this instance I did, and trying to express a certain congeniality, a certain sense of continuation between the past through the present, from the supposedly civilized to the uncivilized. And of course we can ask ourselves whether we are really that civilized compared to native tribes, and that is very, very questionable. Okay, we'll go to the next picture. We're going to move like lightning. There are a lot of pictures to show, and maybe I'll try to show you too many, but I think it's interesting to try to see how an artist works, some of the variations of it. These are fairly recent pieces done in acrylic in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. One of the real problems of a painter is that he has thousands of pieces in his studio, drawings, different kinds of paintings, as I mentioned. I have literally thousands. You paint 20 years, you have thousands of pictures if you're a hard worker. And it's hard to get a feeling out to the immense variety of what you do as an artist. Here's a still life in the studio, just all kinds of common things. There's a tape cassette on top of a charcoal box, paintbrushes, some old potatoes, a dark green pot hiding beneath a box of well-used pastels. And it kind of expresses the grubbiness of the studio, but in these objects there's a tangibility and a solidity that is expressive of the basic essence of life. See, I see these objects as alive as any one of us, whether you, or me, see? And like Chardin or Cézanne, great still life painters who saw the inner soul, if you will, of inanimate objects, I feel very much the same way, that we are kin to one another on the planet Earth. Okay, let's go to the next picture. And we have coming up a drawing done when I was in New York City in Central Park. A little sketch, you know, in black and white, very informal, of a statue in Central Park, and playing against the foliage of the background, and beneath the statue, off in the distance, the dwarfed humanity. And of course it becomes rather emotion-laden and symbolic in a sense of the solidity of this monolith, the statue, and these tiny, fragile, mortal people walking beneath it, you know, trying to draw it as crisply, as solidly, as rapidly, in a sense, with a certain amount of life in it as possible. Okay, we're going to, you know, watchers of the show realize that there isn't a great deal of grace in the program. We try to get to the nitty-gritty of the subject, and production can go by the waysides. Okay, in New York, I was always out on the streets painting reality. I was attracted to it. I was drawn to the vitality out there, drawn to the structure of the buildings in relationship to signs, drawn to the beautiful color, drawn to the... New York City is a painter's paradise, and it has been ignored. Everything in life has been ignored by most contemporary painters. They simply work from set theories, they work from their mind, and nothing in the mind or in pre-established theory is as dynamic as the world around us. It takes a certain amount of energy, it takes a certain amount of will, it takes a certain amount of determination to force yourself out there day after day. It's not easy in terms of weather, and you know, there are no insects, but there are people, and you're dodging cars and all this kind of business. And while we mention the street, coming up March 12th to April 1st, there's going to be an exhibition of a group of artists known as the Street Painters, and I happen to be one of them. It's a newly formed group, and frankly, I believe that the potential is there in the group to reinvigorate painting, to bring it in touch with the vitality of life, the significance of life, the reality of life. You know, people, artists who feel emotion when they're presented by the city, when they confront nature, they try to express nature with tangibility, solidity, and expressive color. Okay, we'll go to the next picture. So this exhibition of the street painters, of which I will be included, will be March 12th through April 1st at the 47 Bond Street Gallery in the Soho section of Manhattan. And frankly, I'm not quite sure where Bond Street is myself, but I hope one of my fellow street painters will lead me there, and I hope you'll come take a look yourself. I think if you're tired of stripes and you're tired of squiggles and you're tired of graphs with a few calligraphic notations in words or numerals as to what the artist might get around to doing, and you want to see some people who are doing something, at least trying. We aren't saying that we're the ultimate, but I think maybe we're going to help put art back on a slightly healthier track. The painting that you just saw very briefly was an old building in Central Park. It was falling down when I painted it, and I'm sure it's not even there anymore. See? One of the functions of art is to express, to capture forever some of the transitory quality of life, in a sense. Let's take a look at this picture. There was a nun sitting out in front of Bloomingdale's, and I made a quick pastel notation of her conversation with a rather forlorn-looking woman. And of course, it was an obvious human confrontation. There was a beautiful massiveness of form about the nun sitting there, cloaked by her robe and the shelf of her lap. I mean, there's a certain massiveness there, done in very quick pastel sketchy notations, getting the hunched figure of the woman. The previous two pieces were done in casein. The others were done in acrylic. And here I go. You caught me taking that picture down. We're coming up with another shot of Bloomingdale's. I happen to have a studio near Bloomingdale's when I was in the city, and their windows at night are fantastic. Any store window is. It's one of the beauties of man's world, his use of light and the contrast with the surrounding dark. And these two figures, solid in themselves, this painted in casein, silhouetted against the window. And of course it becomes rather symbolic. I've laid symbolism on you before, and you're either tired of it or you're fascinated by it. And with the headless men in one window and the women in the other window, there's a certain, I don't want to say surrealism because I'm not a surrealist, but a certain symbolic connection and expressive quality to it. See, if you're an artist, you may not be a philosopher or symbolically aware when you start, but boy, I'll tell you, the longer you paint, the more of a philosopher you become, because in trying to get your pictures out, in trying to get the world to see the world with your vision, to accept your vision of the world, you find out how, and I don't want to attack the world. Go ahead, put the picture up, even though I'm talking. I don't want here's a picture of Greenwich Village, the 6th Avenue Market. I can't remember what cross street. Down around 8th Street, some of the bustle, the truck is red, and the little puffy clouds, and the guy unloading the truck, and so forth. Okay, give it back to me, and I'll continue my philosophizing. One becomes aware of the foibles of the world. Particularly if it takes a certain amount of time for an artist to gain recognition, one begins to ask, why is recognition slow in coming? And particularly after an early moment of self-doubt, when you say, well, gee, maybe I'm not very good. But the longer you persist, the more you realize you are good. You have something to say. And in a way that frightens people, I've discussed this on other programs, that a picture is more acceptable to someone if it is less original, a little more average, maybe more related to a formula than to an original expression. And you begin to realize that's why many of the significant painters have been rejected or reached prominence, shall we say, or people became aware of them late in life simply because they don't toe the aesthetic line of their particular period. Okay, let's show this picture here. I don't mean to just talk and we don't look at pictures. I don't remember where this is. Obviously New York, the drama of a truck, catty corner in the street, a couple of cars, that smokestack towering up into the sky from that gap there in these typical blocky apartment building made in the contemporary formula style of building, trying to catch some of the drama of the contrast of the building with the sky, the jagged interaction of the buildings themselves. Okay. Here's a painting, mixed media. Casein used the last one was pastel. Here's casein used rather thinly and watery like watercolor with Conte crayon drawing on it. And probably we'll have to pan up and down it because it is a vertical picture. And you know, there are squirrels and pigeons flapping around the bottom. There are a couple flying on the left. I will admit the plump one looks rather like a well-fed partridge, but you'll excuse a little artistic license there. A statue crashing and moving behind the twisting trees and so forth. And it's a picture of energy, the interaction of forms, and I think fairly expressive, and certainly expressive of New York City and one aspect of the city. Well, there's so many visual possibilities. It just amazes me that artists can sit in their studios and use their masking tape to even up the edges of rectangles and just to work within the tiniest restrictions, the narrowest limits of contemporary aesthetics. It just continually astounds me. But I feel that our time is a terribly limited one, as you will realize if you've looked at past shows. Okay, kick this one up, and we'll see the 59th Street Bridge looming in its massive structure going across toward Queens, and I can't think what the island is there, with the tugboat in the front, this in casein, expressing another one of the magnificent dynamic views of Manhattan. Manhattan is a painter's paradise, and really I guess maybe that's one of the reasons the street painters have come together. They met each other out in the streets and elsewhere, and you know, if artists have likes and interests in common, it only makes sense that they gather together because, let's face it, most of the world doesn't appreciate the streets, doesn't appreciate the beauty of the signs, of the people in relation to signs, the buildings themselves, the colors and the lights. And it's lonely out there, folks, if you're out by yourself doing it. So it's pretty logical that the group got together. Okay, let's see this one. So this is also over by on the far east side, 1st or 2nd Avenue, some buildings near the entrance of the 59th Street Bridge. And obviously I was fascinated by that dark overhead looming of some kind of a structure in front and the building behind it. This is casein with a little bit of white and black ink dashed on here and there to accent the forms. Obviously there's a confrontation of light and dark, and one can think of a sense of threat with the dark overhang threatening the light object. When I do it in my own pictures and I become aware in recent years, the older you get, the more aware you become of what you're doing. I mean, I just did this because I was attracted to it. Now I know that I was doing it to express this certain conflict within myself, and that's why I can, when I look at a Cézanne and we talk about some of those houses, tiny houses choked by great masses of trees or a dark overhanging tree and a tiny light object, I know because we're brothers, artistic brothers, and I realize from my experience and understanding that he's expressing a sense of tension and threat. The artist is, okay, send it back to me, and we'll get the next picture. The artist is in a sense bearing himself, bearing his soul. I'm trying to be as honest as I can with you about what the artist tries to do, what he goes through. The artist is a frustrated person in many respects. You know, he takes out his frustrations and seeks for a connection with the world through his art. He's a lonely individual. He's cut off from the world simply by his interests. You know, you hear the cliche of the absent-minded professor, and he sort of walks around, he misses appointments, and he's kind of untidy and so forth, because his mind is on his subject, on his field, and he's thinking about his theorems and his historical relations and whatever he's a professor of. Well, it's true when it comes to artists because they're always looking. They're seeing the significant relationships of things. They're being touched and moved by the beauty of the world and as well as by its ugliness. Whether it's beautiful, whether it's ugly, it's true and it's expressive. And I was momentarily distracted by that picture coming on, but I'm glad you put it up. Go ahead and put the picture up because this is near the 59th Street Bridge as well, casein, sort of the entrance of it, and some beautiful buildings and some beautiful signs. Zion Delicatessen with a big Frankfurter on the left in orange and yellow and blue, and on the right a blue sign with a whiskey bottle and the soft whiskey, you know, and the coffee shop down below in orange, riding the green light standard next to the red building, and it becomes a fantastic color statement. Look at the water tank at the top of the building, reaching up, striving, in a sense, something like the striving aspirational quality of Cézanne's Mount Saint Victor. I'm not saying Cézanne and I are on an equal artistic par, or maybe we are. Who knows these things? You just keep painting, but I know from being artistic brothers, being as an artist, you understand artists. You understand that they are in their own world, that they're seeing things other people aren't seeing. People see them, but they don't really see them. They don't respond to them the way the artist. After all, it's only the artist that is out there doing these things. Someone may pass by and say, oh, what a beautiful scene. We go to the next picture here, pastel of Central Park. And toward evening, actually, I think I was drawing it during the day, and it's rather sketchy, but expresses the scene. I can't remember the name of the building on the northwest, on the west side there of Central Park, but as it came on, some stars came out, I think, and I put those three right in the middle. It somehow seemed appropriate and rather poetic with that little old man in the dark coat walking by, somewhat dwarfed by the building and terribly dwarfed by those two trees that rise up to the universe, if one might want to say that. So one can be pretentious about these things, or one can just be honest and direct about them, and hopefully they'll be accepted in the spirit in which they're offered. We come to this one, the East River. You know, I was always over there, the East River. There's a certain amount of peace there, less people, more time to contemplate. It is difficult to paint the city, particularly for a certain temperament. One of the street painters, who's a member of the group, Philip Sherrod, whose work you'll see, rather relishes the contact with the violence and the upheaving crowds of the city. I'm a little less inclined that way, although I love the city, love to express it. And there's a certain solidity in this building. It leans. I will paint things leaning somehow, just to put some dynamism in them. I feel a great deal of dynamism in these pictures. Okay, we got me, and with a great deal of grace and vivacity, I will talk my way toward putting up a couple more, and as we move toward conclusion, and we're having a mini disaster here, but nonetheless, let's see what happens with this picture. That shadow may kill it. I have my matte kind of bending, but in a quick pastel sketch, just trying to suggest some of the surging of the crowds moving through in front of Bloomingdale's, and you know, the movement, the excitement, some of the color. There's a woman with a red coat in the left foreground who will tend to dominate it. Okay, we just had a rescue, but we're going to take it down just as rescue came, so we'll let that one go, and many thanks for the help, Juno. And of course, it's not just the city that the artist paints, you know, if we put this up. He'll paint anything. He'll draw anything. He'll draw interiors. This happens to be an interior of a nice little cabin that we've gone to in southern Maine, very plain and woody and so forth, but very beautiful. The dark window with the lamp glowing, very orange and yellow, becomes very expressive. Again, a contrast between dark and light. What is out there in the fearful dark, in a sense, the little light illuminating the interior, but also interested in color, in form, in the expressiveness of objects and so forth. So art is multidimensional. You know, obviously the clouds here, the light. This happens to be a naval prison, very freely depicted in Cassine with a few ink accents. Naval prison in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, for anyone who's been around there. And, you know, the dark of the building against the light sky, the energy and the animation, the desire of the artist to be a part of nature, in a sense, to find a home in nature, to be out, to experience some of the freshness of nature, some of the reality of it. See, if we live in a sterile, enclosed world, a world that we limit by our own fear or our own limitation of thinking, it becomes a barren existence. See, we have to, artists, you know, I really appeal to all artists, the masking tape users and the photorealists and really all the artists who set these limitations between themselves and the world, these blinders. Just open up, let's try different things. Let's revivify art again, and and the only way to do it, all significant art has always been in contact with nature, with reality. Art must be made from reality, but if you're not in touch with it, then really you've lost half of the battle, and your work can descend into weakness and artifice and sterility, and it won't last because you haven't touched a nerve, you haven't touched a vein of reality that will move human beings afterwards. Okay, let's flash to this one, a pastel. The fireplace with the softly glowing embers, wood piled around, some things piled in front, and perhaps with this homey image. We've had our fireside chat, and we hope that I've given you some sense of what it is to be an artist, particularly a realistic artist. I haven't really talked about perhaps the problems that the realistic artists face, but maybe they're evident from what I've said on past shows, and maybe also evident to you by the paucity of realistic artists in galleries today. Please see the Street Painters exhibition March 12th, April 1st at the 47 Bond Street Gallery. I think you'll like it. Take care.